Hello and welcome to the Swallows Charity Head and Neck Cancer Podcast. Join us on a head and neck cancer journey, presented by Derek Luthwaite.
Hello everybody.
And Chris Curtis.
Hello everyone.
We'll be discussing everything that patients and caregivers need to know about diagnosis, treatment, and so much more.
I'm CEO of the Swallows Head and Neck Cancer Charity, and I'm also a cancer survivor for nearly 10 years now.
And I became a caregiver when my wife was diagnosed with mouth cancer, and it certainly put me on a journey that I never expected to experience during my lifetime. Hello everybody and welcome to the latest episode in the Swallows Head and Neck Cancer Charity Podcast series. As usual, a big hello to my co-host Chris. Hi Chris.
Hello, Derek, and lovely to see your smiling face again.
Well, it's always good to have you here, Chris. I just wanted to remind everybody that, over the last, however many episodes you've listened to, we've been talking about the issues that patients and caregivers are likely to face on their personal journey along the cancer treatment pathway. But today, we're just going to change tack a little bit. And we're going to discuss, with the help of an expert.
That's not me, Derek.
No, it's not you, Chris. That's for certain. But we're going to discuss the effects that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on potential and existing cancer patients and caregivers. I think this will be an interesting one for a lot of people because there have been some issues. Now, we're absolutely delighted to welcome to this podcast Professor Mark Lawler. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Derek. How are you?
Yeah,
Hi,
fantastic.
Chris. How are you?
Yeah, we're all grand, thank you. Now, just let me tell the people. Professor Mark Lawler is Scientific Director for DataCan, which I believe is the UK Health Data Research Hub for cancer, as well as amongst a mass of other roles that this gentleman does. I mean, where he finds the time to sleep, I have no idea. But he's also Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor of Digital Health, and Chair in Translational Cancer Genomics at Queen's University, Belfast. So once again, big welcome to you, Mark, and thanks for giving us your very valuable time.
You're very welcome. Very happy to be talking to you again.
Now, I know this is going to be a little bit different from what you're used to. I've just been following your blog information, and I've just been checking up what you were doing with the World Health Organization a few months ago. Now, I believe that you've been working on collecting real-time data from cancer centres across the UK to analyse the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on general cancer services and patients. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right, Derek. Yeah, no, we started this right back. In fact, COVID-19 has been very personal for me. My uncle died of a COVID-19 related complication. And one of my colleagues, who's an oncologist in Croatia, Edward Vidoliak, while he was reaching out to me to sympathize with me on my loss, this happened last on the 29th of March, 2020. He said to me something that really worried me. He said that people in Croatia were fearing a COVID-19 diagnosis worse than a cancer diagnosis. And that really resonated with me, but also made me really worried. Because anecdotally, I'd heard similar things in different parts of the UK, but there was really no data to either refute or support his statement. And so what we decided to do in DataCan, which is essentially a collaboration right across the UK, looking at using health data, but really using it for the benefit of patients. What we did was we set out to actually see, could we collect data from different cancer centres across the UK and capture what the impact of COVID-19 was on cancer services and on cancer patients. We decided to look at two things that we felt would look at the diagnostic pathway, so people who had suspicious symptoms that might be cancer, and then also the treatment pathway, so people who are on therapy for different types of cancer. And what we found was, first, if we looked at the pathway, the diagnostic pathway, so this was looking at people who had suspected symptoms that might or might not be cancer and were going to their GP. And what we found was that there was a 71% drop in what we call these urgent referrals. So somebody goes to their GP, they have a symptom like difficulty swallowing, blood in their pee or their poo, a lump on their breast. And what happens is then the GP refers them on, if he's worried, he or she are worried, to a specialist service. So we found that had dropped by 71%. Now, what does that actually mean, 71%? That means that 7 out of every 10 people who have a suspicion of cancer were not getting referred on to cancer services. So that really worried us. We then looked to see, well, what was the impact in relation to treatment? And we chose, again, a relatively simple thing to measure. We looked at chemotherapy attendances. So this is by cancer patients, chemotherapy attendances at their clinic. And we found, similar to what had happened in relation to the impact on cancer diagnosis, we saw a similar impact, not quite as much, nearer to 60% in relation to cancer treatment. So that again meant that we were seeing a significant impact in relation to people having their cancer treatment delayed. We're so worried about these two different measures that we saw and the results that we saw of it, that we immediately shared this data with the 4 chief medical officers around the United Kingdom, with the National Cancer Director, with SAGE, and we also then shared it in the scientific community by putting up a preprint on a server. The impact was very significant in terms of people immediately realizing this was a big problem. And we felt that what we found contributed to the restarting of cancer services. We also presented it, as you mentioned earlier, to the WHO Europe. We presented it to the European Cancer Organization, which is Europe's largest multi-professional cancer organization. And they were so taken by the data and worried by the data that they immediately set up a special network on COVID-19 and cancer, which I'm privileged to co-chair.
This is a frightening statistic you've given as well, 2 frightening statistics. But can I just take us back to the beginning a little bit and ask you, is there any evidence that it is people's reluctance to step outside the home and go to the doctor, or is it the reluctance on the part of the health services to either see people and or progress them on through the system?
Yeah, I think it's probably a combination of both. We certainly feel in terms of diagnosis, so that diagnostic pathway, that urgent referral pathway, that yes, the messaging that was around at the time in terms of stay at home, protect the NHS, that had an impact on people saying, I don't want to go out. It was back to what the example from my colleague in Croatia, people were fearing that they might get COVID. And so therefore they weren't going to their doctor with potential symptoms that might be cancer. I think in terms of treatment, it was a mixture, because obviously in terms of, some treatments were cancelled or delayed. And so you sort of saw both the effect in relation to the patient in this situation, because these were obviously cancer patients. But if you think about things like screening, for example, a lot of screening services were stopped. And so therefore you weren't able to attend a screening appointment because of the COVID-19 restrictions. A lot of screening for breast cancer, for bowel cancer were stopped. So a combination. So I think more people afraid in the context of people who didn't have cancer but might have a suspicion of cancer. But I think a combination in people who had cancer were being treated of not having access to services, as well as potentially saying, I don't want to go out at the moment. I'm afraid that I might get COVID.
I just want to bring Chris in at this point. Chris, I mean, your treatment regime as such has finished some time ago, and now you're, hopefully going to not have to go back. But let's say that you, in your situation, were in the middle of your treatment and suddenly you started to get cancellations. What impact would that have had on you as a cancer patient?
I think twofold, really. One, I would have been, what's the word? I would have been upset. I would have been concerned. I would have been very anxious, because At the start, they tell you you must never, ever miss an appointment. You must not miss a radiotherapy appointment, because if you do, the outcome might not be as good. So they tell you that as you start your treatment. Twofold that is so that they make sure that you go to every appointment, because trust me, halfway through your treatment, you don't want to do it anyway, and you would be happy that COVID stops you in some sort of way. But then all of a sudden, you're being told not to come. You'd be thinking, well, what happens now then? Because before you told me, so does that mean I'm going to die? Does that mean the treatment's not going to be a success? So I think it would be a very, very nervous situation to be in. And for the caregiver as well, you know, that's like, you know, it would be horrendous for the whole family, because you'd almost feel like they've given up on you and you're not important anymore. Because, you know, our health service, whether we love them or hate them for everything other disease, when you get cancer, those teams are phenomenal. They make you feel very, very special that you're the only one going through that treatment. So to suddenly then have those that you trust with your life and your body to say, don't come, that's scary.
You're listening to the Swallows Charity Head and Neck Cancer Podcast.
I would very much have been sat by my late wife's side watching the tumour continue to grow instead of having treatment, and I would have been, well, you know how I reacted when I didn't get the treatment in the first place, and I went viral on it, you know, and had to make things happen. I wouldn't have accepted it, Chris. I think I'd have been camped in the passageways of the hospital corridors and saying, you know, get, you know, treatment now. Probably ended up being arrested or something.
But I think, you know, I was in a hospital waiting room once because I had to be there, and a lady came in and a gentleman, and the gentleman who was the caregiver and got told very clearly, you cannot come into this hospital. And he said, but it's my wife, I'm the caregiver, I need to be with her. And these are security guards, not nurses, but security guards, are saying, no, will not come into this hospital. So these big, buffy doormen grabbed the guy and almost threw him out and locked the door and let his wife come in. We should never be at that situation. But, you know, we're going down a different situation here. And, you know, I think the whole thing was thrown on the NHS, the government and everybody to deal with this thing called COVID. And we will only learn in time to come what we've done wrong. But one of the biggest thing we've done wrong is what Mark's here to talk about in this data, because that 5 years down the line is when we're really going to see the impact of what Mark's talking about today.
Let me come back to Professor Mark Lawler then, and the question to you, Mark, now is, well, you know, you've told us that there's been this you know 7 out of 10 drop off in initial consultants. There's been a 6 out of 10 drop off in the treatment. This has to have a serious impact down the line and ongoing. Have you got any data or information on the impact ongoing?
No, absolutely, Derek, and really important question, and something that, you know, we did look at this because we felt it was so important, not only to capture the initial data, but what does that actually mean in the longer term? And I'll talk to you about two parts of the study. One was looking at that in the context of all cancers, but then we worked with Chris particularly to look at it in head and neck cancer. So if we look first of all and seeing what happened overall in terms of, so what we did was we said, okay, the impact of what I've said in relation to both cancer diagnosis and cancer treatment, what effect would that have in relation to potential excess risk of death? And what we found was that across England, what we found was that between 7,165 and nearly 18,000 excess deaths could occur in people with cancer due to the direct or indirect effects of COVID-19. So that's on top of the number of people who normally die of cancer each year. That's extra.
Can I just repeat that? Between 7 and 18,000 additional deaths, potentially.
potentially. That's really worrying. That's sort of nearly 20% extra deaths if you think about it in terms of how many people die of cancer in the UK each year. We then said, okay, let's start looking at particular cancers and see what's happening. And we've looked at a number of different cancers, but I'll just focus on head and neck, obviously because of the audience here today. So what we did was we looked to, first of all, we know head and neck, we've been improving our ways in treating cancer. We've seen better outcomes for head and neck cancer over the last 5 to 10 years. So we said, okay, let's look at head and neck in the context of urgent referrals. So the same thing, the diagnostic pathway. And unfortunately, we saw pretty much similar data than we had with the overall figure. So what we saw here is 60% reduction. So 6 out of 10 people who had suspicious symptoms, swallowing, etc., difficulty swallowing, etc., they were shown to be that dropped 6 out of 10. So that really worried us. And then we said, okay, let's project down the road. And Chris was sort of hinting at this in the conversation earlier. What's that going to mean in 5 years' time? Because that's one of the ways in which we measure how we are successful at treating cancer and also how that varies over time. So if we look at that sort of 5-year projection, what we found was that normally we would expect in 5 years that there would be a 47% 5-year survival for head and neck cancer. That dropped by 4%. But what's important, most important, is what does that mean in terms of numbers of people? Because we're really interested in what's happening to the patient. The numbers are all very well, but the most important thing is what's happening to the patient. That could lead to 451 extra deaths in people with head and neck cancer. So that's a really scary figure in terms, because head and neck cancer obviously is only one cancer of all the different cancers that we talk about. So 450 extra deaths in people with head and neck cancer. So that really is showing you what the impact is going to be. So what's happened in the last year, that forward impact over the next 5 years, and could lead to 451 extra deaths.
So that's where we're at in regard to the research that was conducted. In fact, last year, I believe, was it over last year? Or is it ongoing? Is it stopped now?
No, we're still going on. We've done some really nice work recently, specifically in relation to colorectal or GI cancers, and we've shown, for example, that we probably have missed 500,000 endoscopic procedures due to the pandemic, and obviously that's going to have an impact in relation to patients with different either esophageal or colorectal cancer. We also estimate that just getting back to normal isn't good enough, and so if we think that yes, we're now sort of coming out of the pandemic, services are returning to normal, unfortunately my estimation is that we probably need to be working at 130% of pre-COVID-19 levels. I've just come off a call with colleagues in Europe, and we probably need to be working at that pace for about 12 months to reduce the backlog that we're seeing. So we're not in any way out of the woods yet. But certainly the data that we presented last year thankfully led to restoration of cancer services. But the problem is that we've had that time period where the pandemic was happening, where there was delays in diagnosis, where there was delays in treatment. And unfortunately, that's then now having its effect, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years later. Obviously, we're 1 year later now, but we're unfortunately going to continue to see that effect. So that's why we really need to make sure that cancer doesn't become the forgotten sea in the fight against COVID-19. Cancer is as important. In fact, it is more important because we're storing up a potential epidemic to follow the COVID-19 pandemic, an epidemic in relation to cancer.
So my big question to you now, and if this is outside of your area, I apologize, because I'm just a layman listening to some frightening statistics coming out. Put into context, obviously they make sense. But my question is, do we have the ability in the service to operate at 130%? When it always seemed to me they were struggling to operate at 100%. So what chance have they got of achieving 130%?
I think we have to be very clever, Derek. I think we have to look at ways in which we can be innovative. One way we looked at in colorectal cancer is, or bowel cancer, can we look at different ways of triaging patients? So deciding which people really need a colonoscopy, and because obviously there are capacity issues, or which patients can we use a test like a fecal immunochemical test, and to actually decide whether they're at high risk or low risk of developing bowel cancer. And so that's one example of using our brains, if you like, to say, okay, we have a problem, but let's deal with that problem and let's come up with a solution. So we need to look at innovative ways in which we use digital health. We use remote consultation if we're not able to see the patient face to face. And we use ways in which we can actually increase capacity and also reduce the risk of cancer deaths. So yes, it is going to be challenging. Don't get me wrong, but we are looking at different ways in which we can use other more innovative tests, for example, rather than tests that are difficult to do because of the social distancing aspect. But yes, it's not going to be an easy thing. But the one thing that is really important is that people have recognized at governmental level that we do need to prioritize cancer, which wasn't necessarily the case back last February, March, where the focus was completely on COVID. So I think that is important. I think the Prime Minister himself said that cancer is number one on the list in relation to diseases that have been adversely affected by COVID. We're going to hold him to that statement and push in relation to getting that across the United Kingdom. And it's not just a problem in the United Kingdom. It's a problem right across Europe. I said earlier that I co-chair a special network on COVID-19 and cancer for the European Cancer Organization. And we're launching a public campaign on the 11th of May called Time to Act. And that's really reaching out to patients and to citizens in relation to some of the things we talked about. So making sure that if you do have potential symptoms of cancer, please go to your doctor. But it's also reaching out to healthcare professionals to look at ways in which we can support them. And it's also reaching out to governments and to providers to say, we need to take this seriously. If we don't take this seriously, we are going to have one hell of a problem in the next year or two in relation to cancer. So we have to act, and we have to act now.
The Swallows Charity Head and Neck Cancer Podcast is designed to help and support both patients and caregivers.
I can see Chris is busting to get in with a comment here. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, it is frightening, Derek, and it was a great question that you asked there. It was one of the questions I asked when I first spoke to Mark. So I think it's a great question. But, Mark, you're one man. You're a very passionate man. You're a man that I know that will make changes. But you keep talking about the we's. Who's the we?
Yeah, I think certainly the cancer community have really got together under this. And I think, for example, the work we're doing right across Europe, because one of the things I want to emphasize to everybody, this is a problem that we have to share solutions and share best practice. We see, for example, in some parts of Europe, there hasn't been as much of an issue in relation to COVID and cancer particularly. So we need to learn, what did people, for example, in the Netherlands do that we didn't do in the UK? How can we learn from that to actually make sure when going forward that we're offering the best possibilities for people who have suspicion of cancer, the best possibilities for cancer patients, so that we can really drive the innovative approaches that will make sure that we achieve the sufficient capacity so that we are able to treat patients in appropriate time, and so that we don't have a cancer epidemic coming along the train rails to hit us. So it's really important that we work together. And that means patients, healthcare professionals working closely together, co-creating things, looking at ways in which we can innovatively work to make sure that patients get the best possible care that we can deliver to them.
So do you think the government should appoint a minister of cancer to help sort this out now? Because obviously we've got a health minister, but whether we like it or love it or hate it, he's obviously dealing with COVID on a regular basis. He's dealing with all the other issues. So this will be one part of that wheel he's trying to deal with. So trying to get audiences with him, I think at the moment is easier to get an audience with the Pope. So, and you'll know that more than me, obviously, coming from Ireland. But I just think, do you not think that we should put pressure on our MPs to get the wonderful Boris to make a minister for cancer?
That's not a bad idea at all. I love the fact that you think I have religious power in relation to the Pope. Certainly we need to make cancer a bigger priority. If I look back when the first cancer czar was created, Mike Richards, there was certainly much more of an emphasis on cancer than there is now. So I do think we need to get cancer back up at the top of that agenda. And I think we need to have, certainly, I've spoken, for example, to sessions with the Cabinet Office and certainly made sure to emphasise that they need to be acting in relation to this. I presented them with the data that I've presented to you today and said, if we don't act now, we're storing up, as I said, before, an epidemic, and we really need to act now. So certainly any way in which we can influence the government, if we can influence, the health service so that we make sure that cancer doesn't become that forgotten sea. And, it sort of saddens me in a way, because if we look at the work that we've done over the last 10 to 15 years in relation to cancer research and translating that cancer research into better cancer care has led to improved outcomes for patients right across the United Kingdom. And, I just say, wouldn't it be terrible that that progress we made in 10 years is undone by what's happened in the last 10 months in relation to COVID-19? That's not a thing that we want to see. That's not something that we want to be proud of.
What I'm saying is maybe we need someone that literally will take this battle on inside Parliament. It's all right talking, and you're a great speaker and you're passionate, but you need someone as an ally that is in there that you can speak to on a one-to-one basis to say, get this in front of it, get it in front, get it sorted.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And certainly, or a junior minister or something like that. I think that would make a lot of sense. And it's really important. I think, the point you make, Chris, is very important. We need to get the message in front of the right people who are the decision makers who can actually make change. And any way in which we can up the chances of that happening, we should certainly consider.
I don't know whether that's reality or just a huge wish, Chris. I'd like to think that we could get somebody in a position to influence the corridors of power. But I think history has taught us that even if we can, it's not going to impact this year or next year or probably the next 5 years. It'll be something that takes so long to make any impact, meaningful impact, that today's patients won't benefit. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't progress it. I'm just concerned about the now, the tomorrow. And I just want to come back to, this has been nagging at me since we talked about this, I think, Mark, you touched on it about half an hour ago, 25 minutes ago, and it's nagged me ever since. The 130% uplift in treatment required just to claw back to where we were, and that's going to be maintained for, you reckon, at least 12 months, just to claw back to where we were 12 months previously. And I say, hang on a minute, head and neck cancer, because that's what we at the Swallows are specialising in. Comes with all sorts of additional nightmarish side effects. But one of the big issues with head and neck cancer is, if not all, a very high percentage of patients will end up with some form of radiotherapy. That requires a machine, and that requires a location, and that requires production of masks and CT scans and MRI scans. They can't, where are they going to find another 30% more machines to push 30% more people through? Because I don't believe those machines exist, or am I just wrong?
Yeah, I mean, very good point, Derek. In relation to radiotherapy, actually, interestingly, and our data showed this because we sort of dug down deeper, radiotherapy wasn't affected as much as other medical procedures for cancer, for example, surgery, chemotherapy. And I think that's partially because obviously radiotherapy suites are separate. They're essentially were COVID free, and they stayed open more than some of the other medical disciplines over the COVID pandemic period. So if we look at it, and this is the same if we look across Europe, as I said, just was talking to my colleagues in Europe, we probably saw much more in relation to treatment with radiotherapy being continued. However, what we didn't see was in the context of diagnosis. So as you said, MRI scans, CT scans, they did drop down significantly during the pandemic. I think we have to look at ways in which we can be more innovative in terms of, can we look at different ways of delivering in the treatment setting in terms of fractionated treatment? But we also need to look at capacity issues and having cancer diagnosis hubs that are COVID free and that allow you then to deliver the type of diagnostic capacity that you need to actually address the backlog that we've seen. But it is a serious problem. I mean, you're very right there. Derek, I don't have all the solutions. The numbers frighten me as well, I'd have to say. We're looking at ways in which we can get around that, but you can't get around the fact that we need to have more diagnostic capacity in the United Kingdom. So as well as what we already have, we also need to supplement that with more diagnostic capacity. Yes, as I said, some things are slightly better than others, but that's if you like a bottom line. So that's one of the things I'm asking for, is to improve our diagnostic capacity so we can, because we all know that if we catch cancer earlier, we can treat it much more successfully. My big worry is that the misdiagnoses that have happened due to the pandemic, the delays in cancer treatment are going to mean that then the cancer moves on to a more aggressive later stage of the disease, so-called stage shift. And in that later stage of the disease, much more difficult to treat. And that's why we would see increases in relation to, unfortunately, people dying with cancer.
I'd like to come back on that, Derek, because, I think the general public at the moment, if we're all honest, because of COVID, 5 o'clock every night, and we got bombarded by data. So I think the problem is when we talk about data now, it's important and it's impactful, but it's also lost in this COVID data that everyone has just gone to, well, it's just data. So what I'd like to do is bring a couple of stories to life around this data that the wonderful Mark is talking about and these stats. We had a gentleman called Roger here in Blackpool who was late diagnosed. He was turned away from his GP, turned away from 2 hospitals, ended up at A&E with the tumour literally coming out of his mouth. They then panicked, the NHS, but it was too late. And 6 weeks later, he died. Now, I can't say, none of us can sit here today and say, well, if he'd have got treated right at the beginning, he would have been alive today. None of us can say that because we don't know, because it didn't happen. But, that's fact. That's one of those bits of data that Mark's talking about. Poor Roger is that data. And then only this week, I had an email from a lady patient that was so thankful that she's got through to the other side because she had appointment after appointment after appointment cancelled, and it extended her treatment almost 12 months, but she got through it. Yes, she's got a lot of side effects, a lot of issues because she's dealing with that worry side. But also, one of her friends that she met on this journey had exactly the same problems, and unfortunately, she died. So she's now got to deal with the fact that she went through the same journey as her friend. She's alive, but her friend died. And that was all because of COVID, missed appointments and late diagnosis. These are real people in this data that Mark's talking about. And, these are people that we know about. Every bit of that data is a human being with a family and friends. Roger's family wanted us to create a film around his story, and we have done. And it went viral on social media. And it's still, link is still there through our website, or if anyone's interested, they can email and I can send it to you. but it's harrowing to listen to that story. And that's what brings Mark's words to life.
My situation was very much, I lost my wife to cancer after she had her operation cancelled 3 times. And it was only me going to the press and creating a front page stink, that I actually got her onto the operating table. But my point here is this was pre-COVID-19. Yeah. And the issue wasn't COVID-19. The issue wasn't a lack of appointment availability or references. The issue was entirely down to a lack of intensive care beds. Yeah. And that's the other issue that we have to deal with, because if the people that have been diagnosed with the specific head and neck type cancers that require major surgery, they cannot be released from that major surgery onto a general ward. They have to go into ITC, and there are not enough ITC beds. So this is another element of the complication that I think, sadly, will slow the whole process down. Now, I know you're making noises, Mark. You're doing lots of shouting on a worldwide stage about the issue and what we need to do about it. I guess my question to you now, quite simply, is how does an organisation like ours, the Swallows Head and Neck Cancer Charity, how can we help you make that difference?
Derek, very, very good question. The way in which we do it is by working together and by actually pushing. Who would have thought, for example, that supporters could stop a European Super League by simply protesting against it? So I get great sort of, that to me, I'm a big soccer supporter. So that shows that actually people can make a difference. I'll give you an example in Northern Ireland of something where people made a difference as well, where we worked with Cancer Focus Northern Ireland in a scenario where patients in Northern Ireland weren't getting the same treatment, access to innovative cancer treatments as in the rest of the United Kingdom. So we started a campaign. We worked with the Daily Mirror, and I do agree with you, using the media is really important. We produced over 30,000 signatures. We handed them to the health minister on the steps of the Parliament building. We just pushed. We got different personalities involved. And eventually, it took a while. It took us about 3 years. But eventually we got to the stage where patients, whether they were born in or living in Birmingham or Belfast, were getting the same treatment. So I'm a big believer in patient power, in citizen power, but it works best when we work together so that we can actually amplify each other's messages to the powers that be to say that we need to change. And just back to one thing you did say, Derek, and I'd absolutely agree with you. Unfortunately, what COVID-19 has done is actually exposed the lack of resilience in our health systems, including our cancer health systems. So it's not that, unfortunately to your cost, it's not that the system was perfect before COVID and then COVID just broke the system. It's that the system was not perfect before COVID. And unfortunately, COVID now has exposed that fact and shown that our cancer systems and our health systems in general are not as resilient as we thought they were.
Chris, I've got an idea. I mean, this may be a bit off the wall, but...
here we go. I tell you what, honestly, Mark, when Derek gets an idea, we all start worrying.
Yeah, and so you should, because you need an ideas man in the organisation, and it appears it's fallen to me to be that person. Now, listen, we need an inside track to get this information in front of the government. We need to get ourselves a friendly local MP. We need to get all this data to him, have it presented in such a way that it makes him want to launch forward and be our cancer representative.
Yeah, we need to very happy to work with you on that. I mean, I've presented to the all-party group in Northern Ireland in the Stormont Parliament, and that certainly has got it very much on the agenda in Northern Ireland. So very happy to work with you on that. Obviously, the data is from across the United Kingdom.
All our MPs across the country now on this subject should have to work damn hard to get our vote. And if they don't do something with cancer, don't give them the vote.
You're absolutely right with that. In our elections in Northern Ireland, like I asked every politician who came to my door, this was a couple of years back, what's your position on a cancer strategy for a new cancer strategy for Northern Ireland? And I said, you better answer my question or you're not getting my vote. So I agree with that. I think, at the end of the day, that's why people do have power.
The power's in our hand. So why not what we've got to do is become one.
Listen, I'm conscious of time running on, and I know that everybody's got a busy life and a busy schedule. Mark, is there anything that you would like to add to what we've discussed today that I haven't either squeezed out of you or accidentally asked the right question about?
Derek, thank you very much, and really enjoyed the conversation with yourself and Chris, and you're testing me, and hopefully I came through the test okay. The thing I just want to emphasize to people who are listening, if you have any symptoms that you're experiencing that are odd, unusual, if you're losing weight, if you're difficulty swallowing, please go to your GP. It's safe to go to your GP, so please go to your GP and get seen so that if there's a risk of developing cancer, we can catch it at that early stage, or we can treat it, and then we actually can have a positive effect. There's a lot of negativity at the moment around in relation to COVID and cancer and the pandemic and everything like that. So really be positive, act positively, and in order to make sure that you don't succumb to cancer, and that you live a long and healthy life. So that would really be the message I'd like to get across to your listeners in relation to that. The Swallows are a brilliant charity. I've loved working with you, love to continue to working for you, and I would love to have that rendezvous with a few MPs. Okay, well, just for the listeners, so if you have difficulty swallowing, if you have blood in your wee or your poo, if you have a lump on your breast, please go and see your doctor.
Professor Mark Lawler, thank you ever so much. From the bottom of my heart, I appreciate you coming on, and the Swallows appreciates the work that you've done, and hopefully it's going to lead to some changes and improvements in the system. And I know Chris is going to walk the plank, and I'll walk the plank alongside him in an effort to try and assist and make things happen. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today. Brilliant guest. Could talk to you forever, but I know time's running out.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. And remember, together, we're unbeatable.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
If you want to contact the Swallows, don't forget we have a 24/7 support line. It is answered by patients or carers. So in fact, it will be answered by myself or a caregiver, which is Sharon, my wife. It's not a call centre. It's not a message service. So call us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We also have a website, which is www.theswallows.org.uk. You can find us on Twitter, which is @Swallows Group, or just go on Facebook and type in the Swallows Cancer Support, and you'll find us on that way. And please, contact us anytime. Email is info@theswallows.org.uk, and we're here to help and support. Or if you've got any comments about the podcast, contact us anytime.
As usual, succinct. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed the podcast and the content that we've covered today, if it's touched you in any way, please send us, as Chris has said, an email, or drop us a like or even a dislike. And if you've got any questions that you want covering, also send us those in, and we'll do our very best to make sure that they get covered in some future podcast. My great thanks to Professor Mark Lawler, to my co-presenter, Chris. To all of you, stay safe, and remember, look for those signs. Don't stay at home, go to your doctor. Cheers, everybody.
You've been listening to the Swallows Charity Head and Neck Cancer Podcast. For more information, please visit www.theswallows.org.uk. We hope you'll join us again next time.